Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we are going to analyze the Hindu dated 9th of March 2020. Displayed on the screen is a list of articles that we are going to cover today. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description of the video. Let's begin. Page number 10 of today's newspaper presents an article which talks about missing at birth. Now, this article basically highlights the plight of women in terms of their participation in the process of development and the kind of benefits that they might accrue. The subheading of this article reads: Serious efforts must be made to deter sex selective abortion or infanticide. Now, in this context, it is very important for us to understand how development could have positively impacted in terms of empowerment of women. This would have led to greater participation of women in the labor force, and this would have increased the growth rate or development rate of India as a country. In this context, let's try to understand what is the meaning of development and how it benefits the country as well as the women. Now, the first thing that we need to highlight is that development is the core for any country, and the focus of development is to improve the quality of life for each and every citizen. However, in the case of India, the process of development has not borne enough fruit for its women. What we normally expect that as the process of development kicks in, there is reduction in biases and prejudice against the woman. However, in the case of India, which is more of a patriarchal society, there is an undue preference to male child. It simply implies that as more resources are invested for the development, the kind of reduction in terms of bias and prejudice that we normally expect has not seen, and this has led to female feticide and lack of attention to the girl child. Once a girl child receives less of attention, especially during early stage, then they do not develop properly in terms of health. At the same time, education is also compromised. This in long run leads to the process in which there is less of participation in terms of women. And this again strengthens the patriarchal attitude of the society, which has undue bias in favor of the male child. And that is what the problem that India has seen in the recent past. Now we know that as the reduction in bias and prejudice takes place, there is more of gender equality available. However, in the case of India, as there is less of reduction in bias and prejudice, this gender equality has not been achieved. Now, whenever we talk about gender equality is measured in three basic parameters. First is agency, second is attitude, and third is outcome. Now, when you talk about the agency part is related to the institutional aspect. It means that participation of the woman in terms of decision making, especially from the perspective of the family. And this basically goes against the patriarchal mindset. If there is less of gender equality involved, then agency behavior of women would be weakened and they will not participate in decision making. And that is a sorry state of affairs in terms of development that we have seen in the case of India. Second important aspect is attitude. Now, attitude is related to perception of society. Now, as already mentioned, as Indian society is more patriarchal in nature, which has preference for male child, it means that one of the parameters of gender equality, which leads to better attitude from the society as such, is also compromised. And hence, the perception of society is not positive in nature in terms of a girl child or woman. Third important aspect of gender equality is outcome itself. Now, when we talk about outcome, we mean that the kind of agency and attitudinal change that we see in terms of gender equality, there would be better child sex ratio than what we have seen in the recent past. Second important aspect is what is the age of marriage, especially for girl and women. Third important aspect is the kind of literacy rate that we see, which is also a social indicator in terms of attitude of the society. And another important aspect is female would have better labor force participation rate. As there is more gender equality in the society, these parameters normally improve. So what we expect that once development kicks in, reduction in biases and prejudice against women takes place, and this leads to better gender equality. When gender equality is improved, there are changes in agency, there are changes in attitude, and there are changes in outcomes. At the same time, when we talk about the quest in India, this cycle is missing. Next important aspect that we normally expect is that once gender equality improves, there will be an improvement in health and education. And as more and more girl child receive better nutrition, health and education, there will be greater participation of women in the labor force. Now, as there is an improvement in terms of health and education facilities which are available to women, there is greater participation of women in the labor force. At the current rate, in terms of GDP, the participation of women is low. According to the government sources, male participation in GDP is around 75%. At the same time, participation of female workforce is around 23%. This figure is very skewed because we know that the participation of women in terms of population is around 50%. So we can see that there is an underutilization in terms of women participation, especially in labor force. According to an estimate from IMF, if women in India start participating in labor workforce as we have seen in the Western countries, then the GDP of the country will go up by 27%. And this is significant in terms of improving better quality life for each and every individual of this country. So this is a virtuous cycle of development that we normally expect in terms of reduction in biases, better gender equality, improvement in health and education, and greater participation of women. However, in the case of India, because of the patriarchal nature of the society, these benefits are missing. And this is manifested in the editorial which is highlighted on the outcomes of this particular situation. Now let's take up the article itself. Now let us discuss the article which clearly mentions missing at birth, and this can be considered a national shame. Now the point that author wants to highlight is that discrimination against the girl child starts from the womb itself. This continues after the child has taken birth, and this continues for life. Now there are various kinds of social evils that are prevailing in our country. In these social evils, there is female feticide. Next is neglect after birth. Now, when we talk about neglect, it means that the girl child is given less nutrition. Even the breastfeeding is done for shorter duration in comparison to a male child. Moreover, in many cases, these girl child do not receive adequate nutrition for the proper development of their mind and body. Another significant aspect of this kind of a neglect is that these children do not get sufficient education, and this in turn leads to lack of opportunity in terms of developing in future as well. So this is something which is a very significant aspect that author has highlighted through this editorial. The author also highlights that according to Niti Aayog report, the sex ratio at birth in India has worsened from 906 in 2012-14 to 900 in 2013 and 15. The author clearly says that the child sex ratio of 0 to 6 years was an all-time low of 914 girls to 1000 boys as per the 2011 census. Now this figure is very significant for a simple reason. It shows a declining trend even after 2011. Now when we talk about the figure that is mentioned above, it is for the period of 2013 to 15. When we talk about 2011, then also this figure was lowest in last so many decades, and hence the problem is much more alarming than we normally assume it to be. This problem was further highlighted in the Economic Survey of 2017-18, which has identified 63 million missing girls in India since 2014. So this shows that the declining trend is continuing, and in terms of gender divide, we can see that more than 63 million girl child are missing because of female feticide and neglect. According to the author, the main reason for the prevalence of missing girl and decline of child sex ratio are sex selection based in favor of male child, neglect of girl child, and inadequate nutrition and discriminatory practices. The economic survey clearly highlights this problem as son meta preference. Son meta preference means that parents may choose to keep having children until they get the desired number of sons. This is called as son meta preference. Although it may not involve sex selective abortion, but nonetheless it is detrimental to female children because it may lead to fewer resources devoted to them. This is the kind of discrimination that we need to fight in terms of the attitude of the society. In the context of the news, we need to understand that the situation of son meta preference that we see today is a result of evolution that we have seen in the past. There are a range of problems which include female infanticide to sex selective abortion, which has led to daughter deficit in India and which is more of a structural issue. Today, the number of abortions has outnumbered the number of infanticides in India. This reiterates prevalence of preference for male child. During the pre-1970 phase, female infanticide was practiced at mass scale. It means that preferred way of getting rid of girl child was female infanticide. It means that once a girl child was born, it was killed by using different means which also included starving to death. However, situation changed and in post 1970s sex determination and female feticide, it means that the girl child was killed even before taking birth. Now, as various techniques like ultrasound tests were available, people started adopting sex determination and abortion in this case. In the later phase of post 90s, sex selection at conception stage was adopted. Many technologies are available which can lead to sex selection even before the conception. And this actually shows the mindset of the society at large. It shows that Indian society is patriarchal in nature and at the same time there is an undue preference of male child over girl child. And this particular process has impaired the growth and development of the country as well. Now, the government was very well aware in terms of the social evil that was prevalent during that time, and the government has tried to control this problem as well. At the same time, there was failure of PCPNDT Act, which is Prenatal Conception and Prenatal Determination Act. Now, as already mentioned, during the 70s and 90s, there was problem of female infanticide and female feticide and sex selection. In order to solve this problem, government in 1994 introduced Prenatal Diagnostic Technique Act. In 2003, this act was amended to become PCPNDT Act, and this started regulating multiple aspects of female feticide in our country, which included sex selection before or after conception. However, this particular act failed because in India we have around 2,300 cases of infanticide and around 2,000 cases of abortion registered under the Act between 1994 to 2014. And in today's time, this trend is much more stronger as the number of abortions has outnumbered the cases of infanticides in India. In this context, the government has launched two ambitious projects. First, Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao program, and the second is Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. Now, when we talk about Beti Bachao Beti Padhao program, the program is said to have produced positive results with child sex ratio improving from 914 to 919 according to National Family Health Survey 4. The program basically focuses on prevention of sex selective abortions through effective enforcement of PCPNDT Act. The Supreme Court in 2017 has played its part in directing the search engines such as Google and Yahoo to block content relating to prenatal sex determination. As already mentioned, government has also launched Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. This program was launched, which is more of a small saving scheme to reduce financial burden associated with marriage and education of daughters. Now, here it is important to remind that girl child are normally considered to be a financial burden, and since they're expected to be married off, there is less of investment made in terms of their health, education, and their ability to stand on their feet. Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana basically attacked this mindset of people, and in this fashion, this was a positive reinforcement from the government in order to reduce the problem of girl child. Now, this brings us to the last part of discussion, what we need to do in the current scenario. Now, what we need to do is to move away from protection and lead to promotion, and that is the only way forward. We need a radical shift in approach, moving away from the protection of girl child to the promotion of women as a category. We need to design our plans and schemes for this broad category so that we solve the problem at all levels. Now, we need to understand there are three aspects that we have highlighted in the past. We need to make programs for agency, attitude, and for outcome for the bigger category named as women. We can have some schemes which actually handle different category in terms of the category, the bigger category of women. And this is the way forward according to author. Second important way forward could be that a right-based life cycle approach with focus on nutrition, health, education, equal entitlements in property rights, employment and income generation is the need for the day. If we can bring positive change in these important aspects as highlighted, then the goals of gender equality will become much more easier to implement, and this will lead to participation of women in the development process of the country. Last but not the least, gender sensitization programs focusing at individual level through education, at the institutional level, public and private, at societal level through professional behavior campaigns is the only way to not add more to the shameless inventory of missing millions. So these are the major highlights of the editorial according to the author. Page number 10 of today's newspaper presents an article which talks about having an ear to Adivasi ground. Now, this article is important from the perspective of social issue and social justice, and it brings to forth the problem of tribals in India. At the same time, this topic can be utilized for prelims as well as for mains for the purpose of examination. Now, in this context, let's try to understand the problems that different tribal groups face in India. In this context, the author has quoted a case in which a tribal group from Jharkhand in West Bengal faced the problem of death of large number of people while preparing for the Bandhna festival. Now this problem became much more acute as the administration was not aware of that, and they became aware only when some people of the tribal group approached the administration in order to help them in fighting this problem. This actually defines a very important problem that tribal groups are alienated from the mainstream. We have an apathetic attitude towards them, and this alienation and apathy is the biggest problem that these tribal groups are facing. One more example that the author has highlighted in this article is that, according to the study of Asiatic Society and Pratichi Trust of West Bengal, there are 40 Adivasi groups notified by the government as scheduled tribe. But most of them use the term Adivasi and Santal interchangeably. Now the problem is Santals are actually 1 in 40 tribal groups. They definitely have around 47% of the population, but here we can see that not all Adivasis are Santals. And that is what the problem is in terms of apathy towards these groups. Second problem that these tribal groups are facing is the erosion of their heritage. Now we are aware of the fact that the quality and coverage of the forest is declining at a very fast pace. Moreover, if we talk about politics or economics, in both the cases, tribal groups are at a receiving end. They do not have much say in terms of the politics, and when we talk about economic benefits from a particular area, the interests of tribal groups are normally marginalized. This is the second major problem that the tribal groups are facing in India. Third important problem that we have seen is that tribal groups are considered inferior by the outside world. This is more of a social dogma, but at the same time, this leads to alienation and shows the kind of apathy we have towards this tribal group. Another problem that has been identified in various research is that these tribal groups are seen as beneficiaries of government schemes. At the same time, they are not seen as partners in development. There are various language related issues. At the same time, there are lifestyle related issues as well, which basically defines the identity of these tribal groups. At the same time, these language barriers and lifestyle related barriers also act as a reason for which these tribal groups are not partners in the process of development. They become more of a recipient and they do not participate, and hence they're considered inferior as well in terms of the entire gamut. Another important aspect is of economic gain as well. Whenever we talk about any kind of developmental project, the displacement is normally caused among the tribals, and this leads to a destruction of their traditional way of life. It is important to understand that whenever we change the lifestyle pattern of a tribal group, we are forcing them to change whatever they have learned over hundreds of years. And to adjust to this kind of reality is not easy for them. And this is another problem that tribal groups are facing in India as well. Over and above, there are violations of laws like Forest Rights Act, the Right to Education Act, and the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act as well, which affect them. Hence, we can see that the kind of problems these tribal groups face are not only social in nature, they are political, they are economical, they are cultural, and in this sense, this basically questions the very identity that these tribal groups represent. And hence, we need to develop a holistic strategy to solve this problem. But whenever we talk about solving any kind of problems that involve tribals, we need to have a very clear cut understanding or mandate. Now, in order to solve the problems of tribals, we need to understand the kind of tools or mechanism that we need to follow. Now, in this context, Indigenous and Tribal People Convention of 1957 based its philosophy of assimilation and paternalism through health, education, and land rights. Now, in this context, if we see the kind of attitude that we had towards tribals, we can see that we wanted them to adopt our modern behavior. In this sense, we have taken away the right to choose, and this was corrected in 1989 through Indigenous and Tribal People Convention of 1989 by ILO. This is the only international treaty that deals exclusively with the rights of tribal people. The major highlight of this treaty is that this treaty supports self determination. It means right to choose will lie with tribal people. They can choose whether they want to continue the way they have been living for ages, or they can choose modern lifestyle for themselves. In this context, civil service aspirants are also expected to know about Panchsheel policy of Nehru for tribals. According to this policy, people should develop along the lines of their own genius and the imposition of alien values should be avoided. Second important aspect is tribal rights in land and forest should be respected. Third is teams of tribals should be trained in the work of administration and development. This would have ensured better participation of tribals in the conduct of affairs for the area from which they come. Fourth is tribal areas should not be over administered or overwhelmed with a multiplicity of schemes. Now, this is very important from the fact that if it is over administered or there is multiplicity of a scheme, their self determination would be jeopardized. And fifth important aspect is results should be judged not by statistics or the amount of money spent, but by the human character that is evolved. So we can see that the kind of Panchsheel policy for tribal areas, which was devised by Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, had much better set of values at the core to handle the problems of integration and assimilation of tribals in nation building. At the same time, we need to understand the kind of lifestyle related issues for which we might have an opinion should not be imposed on the tribal people. And that is what the highlight of this article is. Now, in this context, it is important for you to know about particularly vulnerable tribal groups. 75 tribal groups have been categorized by the Ministry of Home Affairs as particularly vulnerable tribal groups or PVTGs. These reside in 18 states and union territories of Andaman and Nicobar. This category of PVTGs was first defined in the 4th 5-year plan on the basis of the report of the Debhar Commission of 1960-61. As far as these particularly vulnerable tribal groups are concerned, the criteria is very simple. First, a pre-agriculture level of technology. Second, a stagnant or declining population. Third, extremely low level of literacy. And fourth, a subsistence level of economy. At the same time, you must be aware of the fact that PVTGs is not a constitutional category. Odisha as a state has highest number of PVTGs, which is 13 in number, and is closely followed by Andhra Pradesh with 12 such groups. Now, the second important category is denotified nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. Now, the government of India has decided that it will set up a committee under the Niti Aayog to complete the task of identifying notified, nomadic and semi-nomadic communities which have not been classified so far under the tribal category. The government also plans to set up Welfare Development Board under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment with a special focus in terms of purpose of implementing welfare and development programs for the denotified, nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. In this field, Renke Commission and the EDATE Commission has done a significant amount of work to identify and list these communities. Now, in the context of the article, from the perspective of the examination, it is important for you to know about Article 342, which talks about the constitutional provision for scheduled tribes. At the same time, you should know about Article 244, which deals with administration of scheduled areas and tribal areas. Apart from these two articles, you should also know about 5th and 6th schedule, which relate to the tribal areas. In this context, the PDF of this video has all things covered about Article 342, Article 244, 5th schedule and 6th schedule. You are expected to go through them and keep the notes handy for revision. Page number 9 of today's newspaper talks about red panda. Now, as far as red panda is concerned, it is clearly mentioned that although hunters have lost interest in red panda, there are traps which are laid for other animals which snare the endangered mammal. In this context, it is important for us to know more about red panda. Now, as far as red panda is concerned, red panda is endemic to the temperate forest of the Himalayas, and it is found from India, Nepal, Myanmar, China. As clearly delineated in the map, you can see here it is found in Nepal, then in India in Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, and Meghalaya. It is also found in Bhutan and in China and Myanmar as well. So, these are the locations in which red panda is basically found. Now, almost 50% of red panda's habitat is in the eastern Himalayas. As far as availability of red panda is concerned, China has maximum number of red panda. It is expected that their number hovers from around 7,000 to 6,000. India is ranked 2 in terms of total number of pandas available in the world. The number of red panda available in India are close to 6 to 5,000. In India, red panda is found basically in Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Sikkim, and West Bengal. Now, if you talk about red panda, it is primarily a herbivore, and its name panda is said to come from Nepali word ponia, which means bamboo or plant eating animal. As far as the conservation status of red panda is concerned, the red panda is listed as endangered in the IUCN Red List since 2008. Now, red panda is of shy and secretive nature and is largely of nocturnal habits, and this makes its observation much more difficult in comparison to other animals. So, as far as this topic is concerned, this topic is important more from the perspective of the prelims examination, and it will be related to the topic of environment and ecology. From the perspective of the examination, please note the location where it is available, the kind of forest, that is temperate forest, in which it is found, and availability of this animal in various states of India. This is important from the perspective of the coming prelims examination as well. Now, on the page number 10 of today's newspaper, there is an article which looks very interesting. No green shoots of a revival in sight as yet. Now, as far as this article is concerned, this talks about that GDP data of the country is prepared 5 times in a year. This article basically focuses the reasons which are involved in terms of developing this data over and over again. In this context, this is not related to the examination and is not important from the perspective of the examination. Hence, we have given this a miss. Based on today's discussion, let's take a practice question. The first practice question reads, consider the following statements about red panda. First is, red panda is found in temperate and tropical forests of Himalaya. Now, in this context, this statement is incorrect, as red panda is found in temperate but not in tropical forests of Himalayas. Second important aspect is, red panda is critically endangered according to IUCN list. This statement is also incorrect, as red panda is endangered and not critically endangered. So both statement 1 and 2 are incorrect. Hence, correct answer is option D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Question number 2 from the today's discussion is, Debhar Commission is related to which of the following? First is disinvestment of Air India. Second is classification of scheduled tribe as a special category. Third is tax reforms, and fourth is higher education. Please take a note that Debhar Commission is related to classification of scheduled tribe as a special category, and this was implemented through 4th plan, as it was discussed in our discussion as well. With this, let's move to the question of the day. The question for the day, that is today, is Indigenous and Tribal People Convention 1989 comes under the aegis of which of the following? Option A, UNESCO. Option B, ILO. Option C, UNDP. And option D, UNHRC.